How do and welcome back. My name is Andrew Hancock and I'm a VMware technical architect from Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. I have worked with the VMware products since their inception in 1998, so that's 23 years I've been working with the VMware product line. Some of you may say if you cut Andy in half it reads VMware like a stick of rock from Blackpool. I've also written over 100 articles for Experts Exchange and won many other awards and accolades. I am honoured to have been accepted into the VMware vExpert program for the last 11 years and more recently a VMware vExpert Pro for the last 2. Welcome back, and in this Hancock's VMware half hour we're going to look at how to P2V a physical computer to VMware vSphere Hypervisor 7. And the computer that I've actually chosen to P2V today is an old Windows XP Service Pack 3 computer. Now, I have actually gone to an awful lot of trouble this morning. I'm not quite sure whether or not you can actually basically see that. Hang on, there we go. It's upside down. Hang on, I can move it that way. There we go. I've actually basically dug out from the stores a PS2 based keyboard and mouse, because this particular machine, which is physical, has a PS2 keyboard and mouse, so that shows how old it is. I'm actually basically using a Windows XP based workstation to put to bed an urban myth that you cannot use VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.0.1, and that is the latest version available. And again, I'll put all these links that I'm using in the steps and in the description. I think it was 2017 that VMware last updated vCenter Converter Standalone, or VMware Converter for short. You know, vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.0.1 is its proper full name, its Christian name, and we shorten it really to VMware Converter. So I'm using a physical Windows XP device. It has a volume license. Now this is important, and I'm going to make this clear from the very start. There's an awful lot of information on the net that I've seen, people sort of kind of saying, oh, you can't P2V, V2V, Windows XP OEM editions or server OEM editions, it won't work, etc. Technically, there is nothing stopping you P2Ving a OEM version of software on a server or a computer. Now, what I mean by an OEM version is often when you purchase a laptop or often when you purchase a server, it came bundled with the software, with the operating system. Very, very common. Now, there's nothing technically to stop you P2Ving that computer. The P2V process will operate and it will complete. However, because the OEM product key is tied to the hardware, depending upon what country you're in the world, it will always break activation. So once you've completed the P2V process and once you've restarted that virtual machine, activate, it probably will require reactivating again because the hardware's changed. You've moved it from a physical hardware device to a virtual hardware device. The virtual hardware differs, and the activation process that we understand and love that Microsoft uses various items within the computer, the hard disk, the motherboard, the BIOS, the graphics card, or something or other. Who knows what it is? Microsoft knows what it is. But if any of those items changes, it basically breaks activation and it requires you to activate your computer again. Now, if this is actually on the computer that it was shipped with, not an issue. However, of course, if you've actually created a new computer effectively, then you've really created a second copy of the operating system which is in breach of the end user license agreement, and hence it requires reactivating. Now that can be a minefield in itself, and that's what we're going to cover today in this video, but bear in mind, if the laptop you had or the server that you had came bundled with the OS, yes, you can P2V it. There's nothing stopping you doing that, and technically it will work, but you will have an issue later on down the road with reactivating that license on that server. So let's just put that to bed now, because I keep seeing people saying, no, you can't P2V it. It's illegal. It won't work. P2V conversion process will function correctly. However, you will break activation, and that is another video or book in itself. Okay, I've probably written more articles about VMware Converter and P2V and V2V on Experts Exchange than any other topic. It is one of the most asked questions on Experts Exchange that comes up weekly, and I've written many articles. This is the article that I've written that we're going to follow today in the video, but I've written many articles about VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.01 and all the previous versions from 4 through to 5. I've also basically written a frequently asked questions about VMware P2V, and I'm just going to read out one quote that I've actually basically written about it. And basically, whether you are a VMware vSphere beginner, intermediate, advanced or expert, physical to virtual conversions sometimes are not easy, and many issues can arise. A successful conversion requires 50% technical knowledge, 25% patience and 25% luck to get a successful conversion. Sometimes it's not as simple as install VMware vCenter Converter Standalone and click next to obtain a successful conversion. What I'm hoping today to do in this video in the next half an hour is I'm going to try and cover 4 articles in one video in how we do a physical to virtual conversion of Windows XP. Tick box. We can use VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.01 to convert Windows XP, and again I've seen an awful lot of items across the forums saying you can't use VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.01, it's not supported. I think this is where we get into a very grey area of does it work and what's supported. Technically it's not supported because Windows XP is end of life, and if XP is end of life, VMware themselves cannot obtain support on that product anymore. Doesn't mean to say that not supported equals does not work, and we'll show that today, hopefully live with no magic and no video editing to show that this works. We're going to follow this article that I've written here, that I put in the steps. We're also roughly going to touch on this article here, which is just an overview of what VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.01 is. Obviously we're going to mention frequently asked questions, and if I get time then I'm going to show you how to shrink and reduce the size of the virtual machine disk using VMware vCenter Converter Standalone as well. So 4 articles that we're going to get all into the same video in 30 minutes. So again, we're using our trusty Dell PowerEdge R730, and if you've been following all these parts, and I think we're up to about part 14 with this one, you can see all the old virtual machines, well not the old virtual machines, but we can see all the old virtual machines that we've been using throughout all these video sessions I've been doing. Those are you can see the virtual machines that we've created, the Windows and the first Linux, the second Linux. I created a third Linux, and in the last part 13, unlucky for some, we actually basically did some export and imports backup for free. So now P2V. Very first thing, I'm just going to drop onto our desktop via RDP. You can do this at the console if you want. If you've got a KVM, if you've got a keyboard and mouse connected to the PC, then fine. I have, but it's down on the floor here, and the monitor's up there, and it's just really difficult, and it's difficult for me to capture the process as well. So I actually wanted to show you. As you can see, this is quite an old old machine, you know, because it's got things like VMware Infrastructure Client, you know, which is back in the days of vSphere 2, vSphere 3. It's got things like vRanger Pro, vRanger Pro CLI. That was one of the very first third-party backup products, vRanger, from many years ago. I think eventually, that got purchased up by Quest, and now maybe part of Dell. I don't know. Okay, so the very first thing that we need to do, and I'm not really going to go through this because it's not rocket science and it's easy to do. It is recommended to get around any networking issues, any permission issues. It's recommended to actually install VMware Converter or VMware vCenter Standalone Converter actually on the device, on the server or on the workstation that you want to convert. I'm just going to maximize that, and just to sort of kind of show you here that I am using, so here we go, VMware vCenter Converter Standalone Client 6.2 build 84666193, and if we go back to my article here, then you can basically see that stand corrected, 22nd of May 2018, VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6201 build 84666193. It's not been changed. I think we were sort of kind of hoping, you know, VMware often claims that they tried to keep the major release numbers the same. So VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6 matches vSphere 6. And we had sort of expected that we might get a VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 7 to match ESXi 7. But it hasn't happened. Don't know why. Maybe the product is now stable enough that, you know, doesn't have any issues. So I'm going to go back to my workstation. So there you go. That confirms that we're running the latest version of VMware vCenter Converter Standalone. One of the things you must ensure if you're converting any of the old legacy systems like Windows XP is that they are fully patched and they are running the latest or last Windows XP Service Pack 3. So how do we do the conversion? Well, quite simply, we click Convert Machine, and we are doing a powered on local machine, this machine, and I'm going to click Next. It will go off basically and have a little look at the machine. So we're actually basically, the destination type is VMware Infrastructure Virtual Machine, i.e. VMware vSphere, either ESXi host direct, or we could actually basically use the vCenter server IP address or fully qualified domain name. If we wanted to create a VMware workstation, then we would choose that option. And we would actually specify a location for the virtual machine. So if you had a NAS or a Windows share, then you can actually basically browse to that share, and you can actually basically create a workstation copy of the machine. So we've got an ESXi 7 server. I'm not going to use ESXi 002 today. I'm just going to change that to ESXi 007. Note I'm using fully qualified domain names. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. You can use an IP address. One of the things that I have seen in later versions of vSphere is if your ESXi server is connected to vCenter server, you have to actually do the P2V directly to the management server, i.e. vCenter server, and not direct to the ESXi server. It will come up and it will actually warn you and it will tell you. So again, we're going to use the root username, and we're going to use that password that we of course set in part 1, and I'm going to click Next. And I can't remember now whether or not I've added this server recently to vCenter server or not, so we'll see whether or not that we get that message. Anyway, I'm going to click Next. Okay, so it's really just sort of kind of telling me that it doesn't like the untrusted certificate, and that's because the certificate is signed by VMware. So I'm just going to say do not display certificate warning, and I'm going to click Ignore. Okay, good. So this machine is not part of a vCenter server infrastructure. As I said, I have added it and removed it. I couldn't remember. So you can see there, it's connected obviously to the inventory because it's actually listing the same virtual machines that are listed here. And I'm just going to go back. Use now by default. It will actually basically use the fully qualified domain name that the guest OS has as an inventory name. Now it's entirely up to you whether or not that you want to use that machine name or not. But for this video tutorial, I'm not going to change anything. I could if I wanted. You know, I could basically just use its host name if I wanted, but I'm just going to basically go with the defaults, and I'm going to click next. Okay, it's now actually asking me for a data store name, and I'm going to use that. I'm not going to use Rust, which remember is our HDD spinning Rust. I'm going to use that flash data store. Tells me the capacity, 697 gig. Tells me how much is free. Tells me it's VMFS 6. And if you look there, it's actually telling me that the total source disk to the current size of the disk in our workstation is 111.79 gigabytes. Bear that in mind. So virtual machine version, I'm not going to basically go with the latest and greatest here. I'm going to knock it all the way back to version 8. Because I've seen some issues with legacy-based systems using the latest virtual machine version, and unless we actually basically want all the features in virtual machine version 19, then I don't really see that there's actually any benefit. So I'm just going to basically turn around and say version 8. We can change that later if we wish, and I'm going to click next. Okay, so now we're at the stage whereby it's telling us what to copy, how many devices, memory. Now, we can change all these afterwards. Now, I think a couple of people have asked on Experts Exchange when they do a P2V or a V2V, do they need to create the virtual machine on the ESXi server? No. The conversion process will create the virtual machine and it will copy all the data over. So, I'm not going to do any CPU throttling or network bandwidth. I'm not going to do any synchronization. I'm not going to install VMware tools. I'll do that manually. Services, this is where here you can actually basically change the services, so you can basically mark them or stop them. I'm not going to change any of that. I'm not going to cancel the wizard, but I am going to go back and forward. Now, I have seen issues whereby if you get a bit funky and you start doing lots of changes here, there's a higher chance that the virtual machine conversion will fail. So my advice is change as little options as possible and change them later when the conversion has been successful. So it's actually asking me if I want 4 network adapters, but as I've just said, I'm not going to change anything here. There's one thing I am going to change because I actually basically wanted to cover and tick off this article here that I've done, how to shrink and reduce. So let's just sort of going to go back. So one of the things I'm going to do, I'm going to select edit here. Now you can see that our destination size, if I didn't change anything, it would be 111 gig. That would be the size of the virtual machine that is created. Now you may remember that I've actually said about creating virtual machines, start small and grow. It's easier to grow a virtual machine than it is to shrink a virtual machine. So what I want to do is I'm gonna shrink this virtual machine. So it's actually telling me that the minimum size is 23.9 gig. So 23.9 gig is the total number of files or space used currently in this VM, 23.9 gig. So we can't shrink it more than 23.9 gig. But I don't really want to create a 111 gig disk, because if I just go with the flow, I'm going to have difficulties later resizing that. And the way that we resize it, the supported mechanism of resizing or shrinking a virtual machine in VMware vSphere is to use VMware Converter again. So maybe what I'm going to do, because I actually wanted to show you to do a V2V as well as a P2V, is I'm going to turn around and I'm going to say I want a 90 gig disk. So my destination is going to be 90 gig. It's probably a little bit bigger for what I wanted, but what I'm going to do later is we're going to do a P2V here. Our source, our destination disk is going to be 90 gig, and then we're going to do a V2V, and we're going to shrink that again. So I cover lots of articles in one super video for you, as I've gone to an awful lot of trouble in digging out that PS2 keyboard from the store. Okay, so I'm happy with all the settings there, and I'm going to click next. So now that's just a summary of what we're going to do. So we're going to convert the powered on machine. We're going to set, that's the machine name, the hardware version, that's the host server, we're connected. We're going to do 2 sockets times 1 cores. We're going to change that later. You may remember that I mentioned about using cores and not sockets, so we're going to change that later. And we're going to change all these networks to Spectre forward power. And I'm going to click finish. Now hopefully when I click finish, that's going to submit the job, and the job's going to start now, and it basically says it's running, and I'll just click there and I'll just have a little chat. Now often if it's going to fail, it will fail in the first couple of percent. If you get past 1% to 2% to 3%, then you're on the way, and then it could basically then fail between 1%, 2% and 60s, 90%. But at the moment it says basically it's happy, it's running. Take the estimated time remaining as a pinch of salt, because that can vary. A lot of people basically ask questions as how can I speed it up. That speed really of conversion is based on a number of things. It's based on the source read IO of the disk. It's also based on the network speed, and it's also based on the destination speed as well. So, you know, walk away, grab a cup of tea, grab a cup of coffee, and wait for the conversion to be completed successfully. So I'm just going to basically waffle on whilst everything looks at the moment, but I've got my fingers crossed because things can fail. You can have network issues between the desktop or the physical device and the server. Some of the other issues I've actually basically seen as well is when you've got errors on the disk. It's also worth sometimes actually doing a check disk just to check that you've got no file errors, and also check that you've got no hard errors as well. If you do P2Vs a lot and you find that the conversion status percentage is failing at the same place, e.g. 63% all the time, it's quite possible that you've got a hard disk error that needs correcting before you can convert the conversion process. P2V VMware Converter Standalone really is not really rocket science. You know, basically what it does is it looks at the source machine, it creates a virtual machine based on the same specification, i.e. CPUs, memory, and network interface. It then basically uses its own virtual hardware for the storage controller, and then basically it will create that on the destination server, on the ESXi server. Like if we actually go back to our ESXi server, you will see there that the virtual machine has already been created, and it's Microsoft Windows XP Professional 32-bit. So that's already been created, the actual shell. And then what Converter basically does in the background is it actually basically does a file and directory copy of the NTFS file system or FAT32 file system directly to our ESXi server. Okay, so we've got to 2%. So I'm fairly confident now that at 2% we've passed the initial hurdle of creating a snapshot of the system using VSS, and now the conversion process is in place. And you can see that that initial estimated time of an hour has now basically jumped up to an estimated time remaining of 4 hours and 54 minutes. So I'm going to go away and have a long coffee, and I'm going to come back in 4 hours time. I'm going to keep this recording, although I may pause it every now and again. Okay, so now we've actually basically jumped up to 6 hours, so this is going to be a very long recording. But what I will do, I will definitely speed this up in post edit, because otherwise it will be the longest Experts Exchange video. Or maybe I'll just upload it for shits and giggles, and you can sit there for 6 hours and 34 minutes waiting for the conversion to finish. And as I said, you know, a lot of these conversions, I've been doing conversions for a very long time. And sometimes they can be a hair pull moment, believe you me. That VMware vCenter Converter Standalone does not work. This was the original product. There are many third-party versions available now. There are versions by Paragon. You could use Veeam Free Agent to do much the same thing. So all is not lost. If you know VMware vCenter Converter Standalone does not work, then you know there are other tools that you can use. You know, or you can go back old school and dig out you know, P2V helpers, which we used to use, and cold clone ISOs, etc. If you have a very tricky virtual machine. So we've been running for 3% now, been running for 4 minutes, and now it's dropped to 3 hours and 44 minutes. 4 hours and 33 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to go off and grab a coffee and a lunch. It's a cold day here today in the UK, and it's been raining all morning. I was probably going to go out and inspect the bees today, but I think I might hold off later this afternoon if it gets a bit warmer, or that'll have to be another day. But anyway, I'll let this carry on recording, and I will come back shortly after my long coffee break, and I'll speed this up in the post edit as well. So I'll catch you later, and I'll come back shortly. Thanks now. Well, I'm back. That actually took a little bit. That was actually much quicker than I thought. In that video there, you probably saw that it varied from 6 hours to 4 hours to 3 hours. But in fact, actually, it took 2 hours and 1 minute. And I actually walked away, got a cup of tea, got a cup of coffee, had a bite to eat, forgot about it, come back and thought, oh, okay, fair enough, it's finished. What is important here is that it's reached 100%, and you've got a tick and it says completed. Now the P2V conversion has been done. We won't really know until we actually basically hit that power on button and the machine boots correctly, because all this really does, as I said, it does a file and directory copy. It creates a virtual machine specification, brackets container or specification. It tries to inject the storage controller, driver, and modify the registry, and basically that's it. There's still an awful lot of post-processing that needs to be done with a P2V, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but is well documented in my articles, whereby you need to log into the virtual machine and go into Device Manager and remove all the ghost hidden hardware, which of course no longer exists in the virtual machine. That's what you should do. So don't just think next, finish, power up the virtual machine, I'm done. There is some post-processing that probably take you about an hour to do if you want to do it properly. So we're finished with our VMware vCenter Converter Standalone now. One thing that I do remember, that of course the networking is completely changed. So the networking really has been ripped and replaced. So effectively all the old networking settings have been removed and a new network interface has been added. So when you power on the virtual machine for the first time, it's not going to have any networking information that may have been important in the physical machine. So for instance, static IP addresses, all that TCP IP information will be put back in. Obviously the MAC address will have changed as well, and all the hardware has changed as well. And as I sort of kind of mentioned, if it's OEM, then activation is going to break as well. So I'm just basically going to make some changes before I power on. And I said that I would do this, that I'm going to basically change this to 2 cores per socket. Like we mentioned when we were creating our virtual machines, I'm actually basically going to give it 4 gig of RAM. I don't need all these network interfaces. I don't know why it's created so many CD-ROM drives either, but for some strange reason it's not seemed to have deleted them. So we got 2 vCPUs, 4 gig of RAM, our 90 gig disk that we set deliberately. So we've shrunk the disk down from 111 gig, you may remember, to 90 gig. And we're going to do a V2V on this in a minute, and we're going to shrink that down further. Just let me see if I can get rid of them CD-ROM drives. VMware Converter looks at the physical machine and tries to match like for like. So it does a scan. If it finds 4 network adapters in the physical machine, it'll give you 4 network adapters in the virtual machine. And the same with CD-ROM drives. I don't know why on earth it thinks that I need 3 CD-ROM drives. Okay, not to worry. I'll have to have a little fettle around with that later. Okay, so CPUs 2 cores times 1 socket, 4 gig of memory, 90 gig disk, 1 network interface, floppy drive, 4 gig of memory, 4 meg for the graphics card. I'm just going to basically tweak that, and I'm going to say specify, and I'm just going to give it a little bit more video memory, save. Okay, so I'm happy with them settings, so I'm going to click power on. Now, if all is correct, what we should see is no blue screen of death. And we should have the ability to log in. So I'm just going to basically select guest OS, send keys, Control-Alt-Delete. Now, of course, remember that there's no VMware tools in this. So as there's no VMware tools, you will find that you have no mouse control. And what you will find, which is nothing to worry about, leave the machine stabilized for a bit, because it will do some plug and play and install all those new virtual drivers that it's finding. I have one tip for you here that I'm going to share with you about the lack of VMware tools in the machine, and you'll find that there's no mouse. What we can do, we can use something called if we actually look at our console options, we've got the ability to launch a remote console using the vMRC application, which we can, if you click that download, that will take you off to VMware and download it for you. If I click launch remote access and I say open VMware remote console, which is a thick application, it will then launch a separate console application or a Windows application which allows you to connect to the virtual machine. And this you will find that the mouse works perfectly. As you can see, it's welcome to and found the hardware wizard. It's basically complaining about something is missing. Probably we need to install VMware tools. If I actually basically look at my computer, you can see all those DVD drives that it thinks it has, and there's our 90 gig disk. There you go. There you can see that it's finding new hardware as we speak. Video controller VGA compatible. So there we go. We've done a number of things in that video. We've used VMware Converter Standalone 6. I do Control Alt, that takes the focus away. We've P2V'd a Windows XP computer using VMware Converter Standalone 6201, which some people turn around and say it doesn't work, it's not supported, and you need to use an earlier version of VMware vCenter Converter Standalone or VMware Converter. Well, hopefully we've put that right. That's wrong. The latest version and the last version that's currently available of VMware Converter 6201 converts Windows XP with no issues at all. OEM activation, very different issue. We've used VMware Converter 6201. We've converted a Windows XP. We've converted a physical desktop, physical computer, and we've also showed you how to shrink that original 111 gig disk to 90 gig. So I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do one more conversion, and this is called a virtual to virtual conversion. So I'm going to go back to our virtual desktop computer, and I'm going to say shut down. And here the mouse seems to have gone a bit goofy, so I'm struggling. Probably maybe should have installed VMware tools. Let's just right click, console, launch remote console. What I want to ensure is that I've got a clean operating system. Because we've not got VMware tools installed, I can't trigger a shutdown from the menus. And as I mentioned previously, we want to ensure that we've got a clean NTFS disk and not a dirty disk, because that will actually basically affect our V2V. Okay, so the virtual machine is off. Now this is VMware Converter that's actually installed on my local workstation, and I'm going to select Convert Machine and powered off this time. So I'm going to click the powered off virtual machine on our VMware infrastructure virtual machine. I'm going to specify the IP address or fully qualified domain name. I'm going to specify the username, root, and that password that we set, remember, in part 1. We can click next. There's our virtual machine, the one that we've just P2V'd, but it's now virtual. So this is a virtual to virtual conversion. And there's a number of reasons why we'd want to do this. Shrinking disks. You've created a virtual machine that has too large a disk and you want to shrink it down. This is a supported method. You could have a virtual machine that's got too many snapshots or a very large snapshot. This is a mechanism that you can use as well, or to back up. VMware Converter is often referred to as a poor man's backup. So I'm going to click next. And now we're going to specify the same ESXi server to receive as the destination to receive the new VM. So again, I log in again. Now that could be a different ESXi server. So we're actually basically copying it from one ESXi server to another ESXi server, or it could be a vCenter server. And I'm going to click next. Now it's actually asking me for what the destination name is. So I'm just going to use exactly the same name, but I'm going to say shrunk. I know what, I'm going to say 30G. We're going to shrink this disk to 30 gig. Next. And what I'm going to do this time, I'm actually going to basically send that or copy that to my Rust data store. So it's going to basically copy it from the current data store, which is ESXi 007 underscore local underscore VMFS 6, and it's going to convert that to the Rust data store. And this time I'm actually going to turn around and say, yeah, give me a version 19 virtual machine version, followed by next. Now this is exactly the same as we've seen before. Install VMware tools, network interface, 4 gig, 2 sockets times 1 socket times 2 cores. But this time I'm going to select a volume to copy, and now I'm going to select 30 gig. So it's going to do a virtual to virtual conversion, and it's going to copy that virtual machine and convert it to a new virtual machine, so effectively a clone, but it's going to shrink the disk to 30 gig, all in one operation. So it's going to change the virtual disk size and change the volume / partition all in one process. And I'm going to click next. There's the summary screen, and I'm going to click finish. And again, it's going to submit the job, and it's going to show me there that we're running. Now we should actually basically find that this actually is a little bit quicker, because now basically it's copying the information off the data store, the flash data store, but it's actually still copying it to my local workstation, and it's copying it back to the ESXi server. So my local workstation is connected as a gig. The source file system data store is flash. The destination data store is spinning Rust, HDD, so that's a bit slower, but we should actually basically expect this conversion to be a lot quicker than 2 hours. And don't worry about it, in the post editing of the video, which I'm going to have to do a lot this time, we'll shrink that 2 hour conversion down to something acceptable, like 20-30 seconds, rather than you watch a 2 hour video. So again, okay, it's telling us it's running 2% complete. It started 1:52. It reckons it's going to take 57 minutes, but as we've previously seen, that estimated time will change a lot as it starts to basically copy information from the server. We're at 4% already, and as you can basically see, the transfer time 11.35 megabits per second is far faster than what we were copying before. I think that physical workstation that we're using had a 100 megabit interface, so it's much slower. But again, it's still a data move operation, it's still a data shunt. These things don't happen quickly. So it's coming up to lunchtime, or it's almost past my lunchtime. So I think I'm going to go away and get some nose bag. I'm going to leave this running, and I'll come back and we'll speed this up in post edit, and then we'll basically finalize with a summary of what we've been doing in this video. So I'll come back shortly. And we're back. Okay, so running time 28 minutes, and I'll speed all this up in the post edit because you don't really want to be having to watch paint dry. Okay, so here's our 30 gig disk that's been shrunk. Remember, of course, if we look at our virtual machine, this was the original. It was a 90 gig disk. I'm going to power that one on, and this, I don't need to look at it in a minute. This is our 30 gig version, so I'm going to power that one on, and there's no reason at all why this should fail, because it's an exact clone of our original virtual machine, and that of course is a clone of our physical machine. And just to actually basically show you the properties of this, I just wanted to show you there that it's an Intel Pentium 4 CPU, 3.4 gig with 1.5 gig of RAM. So that's the physical machine, and this is the first P2V that we did, which was 90 gig, and this is, I'm going to log in with the remote console on this one because I want to show you exactly, launch remote console, I want to show you the disk size. Just wait for that to spin up, because remember, we've still not installed VMware tools, and we've covered that in a video. So I'm basically just going to, because if we actually basically use the remote console, we've got access to the mouse that we haven't got through the GUI. And if I actually basically just select my computer, and there we have it, there is our .30 gig disk. So just to summarize, because we've done quite a lot, we've covered quite a lot in this whole VMware converter, or VMware, let's get its name right, VMware Converter for short, or VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.0.1. So we followed this article that I've written previously for Experts Exchange on how to P2V a Windows computer to VMware vSphere Hypervisor 7. We followed that exactly to poo-poo and debunk the myth that the latest edition of VMware Converter, I wrote there as of 9th of June 2020, but this still works. This is still the same version almost 12 months on. So it's to debunk this myth that VMware Converter, you know, people turn around and say, oh, you need an older version of VMware Converter, you won't be able to convert it. Rubbish. An absolute nonsense, foobar. As I've shown, VMware vCenter Converter Standalone 6.2.0.1, which is the latest edition at present, can convert quite successfully Windows XP Professional, SP3 or SP2 with no issues. We've spoken about if you have an OEM version. If you have an OEM version which is assigned to the hardware, supplied with the hardware, technically you can P2V, but you're going to get issues with activation. The same will apply if you do a retail conversion. You're going to have to reactivate, but as it's a retail version, then you're not going to have any issues with activation failing. So we've debunked that myth. We've done a P2V, we've done a physical to virtual conversion of our Windows XP desktop, which I dug out from storage because it's about the only physical device that we've got left here in the building. I dug out our old faithful PS2 keyboard for you and mouse. Here it is, if you remember them. So we could actually basically plug in to even get the thing to boot, because it was complaining that it had no keyboard and mouse attached and therefore wouldn't actually basically boot. I'll put all these articles that I've written in the steps so that you can refer to them. And please do refer to these articles. There's an awful lot of information in these, especially in the frequently asked questions. You know, although I wrote this in 2013 and it's 7 or 8 years old, the P2V process has not changed at all. And as I actually stated there, and I'm going to repeat it again, you know, whether you're a VMware vSphere beginner, intermediate, advanced or expert, physical to virtual conversions are not easy. You know, they require 50% technical knowledge, 25% patience and 25% luck to get a successful conversion. We've also done a V2V, a virtual to virtual conversion, and I've also basically showed you how to shrink or reduce a VMware virtual machine using VMware vCenter Converter Standalone and the latest version. Handy if you've oversized your virtual machine to start with, and I did state this when we were creating virtual machines. Always create small disks, grow them on demand. Don't go crazy and assign 1 terabyte 500 gig virtual disks, because there is no method in ESXi or vCenter server to shrink them. You've got to use a third-party tool like VMware vCenter Converter Standalone. So we've showed that as well. So it's quite a bit of a long video, this one. Hopefully I'll try and shrink it all down to get it in 30 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed it as well as I have. You know, virtual conversions is still something that I do on a regular basis. And I keep saying year after year after year that maybe one day we won't have any physical devices left and everything will be virtual, and we no longer have to do any virtual conversions, physical to virtual conversions, but they still come up. So certainly, by all means, VMware vCenter Converter Standalone is not a dead product, not yet anyway. So once again, thanks very much for joining me on this journey into P2Vs and to V2Vs with VMware vCenter Converter Standalone. And the next part will be part 15, and I don't know what I've got installed for you in part 15. We're sort of kind of coming to the end of our initial series. I've done parts 1 through to 20, and I did parts 1 to 7 fairly quickly, and then I jumped to parts 16, 17, 18 and 19 because there was the release of 7.0.2a. So basically did some videos on upgrading that, and then I basically jumped back to parts 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So part 15, you know, endorse this video and look out for part 15 in what we can do for part 15. Anyway, all the best. It's been a pleasure as always. So stay safe out there. All the best. Goodbye.